needs to be, but I'm going to give you what I got. You know, when Shannon was on, come on, Ada. When Shannon was on study abroad in Europe, she stayed in Vienna. And in Vienna, if you don't know what this is on the picture behind me, in Vienna, there's this glass plate in the street, and those things you see in that plate are keys. And what those represent are keys to the houses of Jews who went to concentration camps and never came back to their house. It's sobering, and it really makes me think, and it's made me think for a long time about what we do to each other. You know, genocide and hate are something that has existed, I guess, since the creation of time and continue to exist. And whether we talk about the concentration camps of Germany or the killing fields of Cambodia or the desert of Syria, it still is something that goes on all around us. You wonder how it could happen. How could we do things like this to other human beings, regardless of whether we agree with them or not, or like them or not, or maybe even go so far as to say we hate them? You wonder how we could do that. You know, it's one thing to see one person to hate and to perform an act of violence, isn't it? To do something terrible and tragic, and we see that, and we think, well, how could they do that? What could drive them to the point that they would do this? But I think when we see these bigger things, these bigger acts of violence against humanity and against the human race, I think what staggers me about it is it's not just one person, it's this group of people who did these things. You know, Hitler didn't kill all the Jews. There was a whole lot of people that were involved in doing that. And I think when I limit that to Jews, I limit the scope of that tragedy, because if you know history, you know it wasn't just Jews. It was anti-Semitism, Semitic speakers against gypsies, against the mentally ill, the infirm, the aged. There were a lot of other groups involved in that, and that's just one case. And if you really study throughout history the case of genocide on the scale, this wasn't the largest case of this by any means. And you wonder, how could you get to that point? And I went to a lecture one time at OC by a guy that was in Hitler's Youth, and I've shared this with some of you before. It was very enlightening, and what he had to say. He was raised up as a Hitler's Youth. He was in the battle when Berlin actually fell. He was 17 years old. And he brought into how Hitler did that, how he motivated people to be on his side, and how he was able to do all these things, these horrendous acts, and to make people do that. And he said as he was fleeing Berlin, he was in the back of this pickup, and he was really unaware of these concentration camps and the things that were going on. And as he was in the back of this pickup fleeing out of Berlin, and the Allies were coming in, he said he went by where this concentration camp was, and he seen all these emancipated people there, and he saw them hitting him with rifles. He's a man. He said it just made him ill, and he thought, how could people do that? I guess he hadn't reached that point. And the thing that he brought up that I thought was really interesting is he said that Hitler stripped them of their humanity. In other words, it wasn't that they didn't think themselves as killing another person or another individual or another human. They thought of them as subhuman. They didn't think of them even as part of the human race. And the way they were able to abuse them and violently do things to them is because they had stripped them of their humanity. They were no longer people. They're no longer worthy of rights or worthy of respect or worthy of any of those things. They had stripped them of their very humanity. And we were, this week, there was a story, and I don't know if you read it or not, but the reason that kind of brought this up, and it wasn't this great tragic event, but there was this couple on this airplane, and they were going to the UK, and they ordered these snacks, and apparently they started eating them before they had actually ran the card to pay for them. It was only $9, 7 pounds, and they had, the card wouldn't decline to go. They didn't have enough cash between them. They were coming back off of vacation. And you know, my kids' generation, they refused to carry cash for whatever reason. I think it's a terrible idea, but you know how it is. And they didn't have any cash, and the card wouldn't go. And so they said, well, when you land, the police will be waiting. And they kind of thought it was a joke, you know. Police will be waiting for $9, basically, 7 pounds. And sure enough, when the plane landed, the police escorted off the plane. And that's, you know, a whole other story. I mean, you can Google this story. But Susie and I both looked at each other. And the thing that struck us was not that they couldn't pay for it, not that the airline called the police. The thing that struck us, and I hope maybe striking you right now, is that nobody on that plane paid the $9. I mean, I don't get that. I mean, if I had been on that plane and somebody had been going through that, I would have paid the $9. I mean, I just would have done it. And yet nobody did that. On a whole airplane full of people, nobody had the compassion to pay the $9. And it just struck us, and it struck both of us about the world that we live in and humanity as a whole and how we view this. The word humanity is from a Latin word, and it basically means human nature or kindness. It can refer to the kind feelings humans often have for each other. You know what's funny? I seem to live in a world where it seems like humans don't have enough kind feelings for each other anymore. We've kind of lost our humanity. And I don't like that. I don't like being in that kind of a world. I don't know if you do, but I don't like it. I don't like people being mad at each other. I don't like road rage. I don't like people yelling at each other, and I don't like that. I don't know why we can't just love each other a little more. I don't know why we can't have a little more humanity when we deal with other members of the human race. I don't understand that. We dehumanize. You know, isn't it funny to you how a normal, sane, kind individual that's just like me and you, that has a family and kids and a life and a job and maybe goes to church somewhere, maybe they don't, I don't know. Isn't it funny to you how they can get behind the wheel of a car and all of a sudden they become this hateful person? You ever notice that? And inherently, I know they're not really bad people. I know if we could just get out of the car, we probably could have pie, right? But when they're in that car, all of a sudden they're different. And you know why? Because when they're there and you're in that car, they're not seeing you as another human being. They're seeing you as an object of their rage. They're seeing that car, that guy, that person, right? But if they knew you, and they're like, well, that's Teresa, I'm going to be mad. I mean, if Teresa ran me off the road, I'd be all right with it. You know, might call John and say, hey, your wife ran me off the road. But I mean, I'd be all right. But if somebody I don't know ran me off the road, that might be a whole different situation, right? Because why? Because they're not human to me. I don't have a relationship with them. I don't see them as another member of the human race that I need to be kind to and I need to respect and I need to love and I need to show them the same consideration that they would show me because I've dehumanized them. I've deprived them of human qualities, personality, and dignity. That's what I've done. And every time you ever really get mad at somebody, that's exactly what you do. You deprive them of their dignity, you deprive them of their personality and their qualities, and you only see one thing, and that's what made you mad. And you don't understand the situation, you don't understand the person, you don't understand who they are. You've made a judgment. And I've done it throughout my life, and I'm sure that you have too. But God does not want us to be that type of an individual. And I think that's something that you and I have to think about a lot. You know, when Jesus came to the earth, people thought, well, Jesus has come to rectify our problem, to kill our enemies, to bring us back to Jerusalem. And I hear this story all the time. And in Zechariah, you know, Zechariah was John the Baptist's dad. And when Zechariah's tongue was finally loose, and Zechariah puts out this poem of praise, song of praise, whatever he did. And Zechariah puts this out, and he brings back this is out of the 106th Psalm. He brings forth this Old Testament prophecy about what's coming. And in this deal that Zechariah is saying, it says, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. And so this Jesus they're looking at, this Savior they're looking for, is this guy that's going to come and he's going to wipe out all their enemies. He's going to purge all those people that don't think like they do, that don't act like they do, that aren't them, that don't speak like they do. He's going to take care of all that. He's going to give them back Jerusalem, he's give them back that land, and everything's going to be wonderful. You see, that's what they wanted. That's the Jesus they wanted. Zechariah says it right here. Salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. Jesus walked into such a world of hate. And the Jews looked at the world around them, and the people that weren't Jews, to them, were subhuman. They wouldn't even walk into a Gentile's house. They hated the Samaritans. They'd wipe the dirt off their feet if they walked in any place that was unclean. There wasn't nothing to do with them. And the rest of the world kind of felt the same way. The Samaritans didn't like the Jews. The Romans didn't like anybody. And in the middle of that were a bunch of Greeks that didn't know who they liked or didn't like. I mean, it was crazy. And Jesus walks into this world, and they want him just to wipe all these other people out. They want him to do, but guess what? Jesus' whole ministry was about transcending hate. Of all the people in the world, the Jews hated the Romans. I mean, they were subservient to them. The Romans ruled their land. They thought God gave them that land. God gave them that land forever. That should be their kingdom. That should be their land. That should all belong to them. They should rule it. And yet here the Romans are. And the Romans are in their face. The garrisons are in Jerusalem. Roman soldiers are walking the streets. They're paying tax to Caesar. They hate them. They want them gone. They want those Romans gone. And yet in Luke 7, the Roman centurion comes to Jesus and wants his servant healed. And Jesus doesn't turn him away. Jesus says, "Go, it's been done to you as you say." And he goes home, and the servant's healed. Jesus healed a Roman servant. A Roman. And if that ain't bad enough, there's this Phoenician woman who comes to Jesus because her daughter's a demon, comes to Jesus, and she goes, "Heal my daughter." And Jesus says, "I came to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And the woman says, "Well, don't even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table?" And Jesus says, "Because of your faith, I'll heal your daughter." A Gentile. Jews wouldn't even go into the house of a Gentile. They wouldn't even. And yet here Jesus is healing this Gentile's daughter. And if that ain't enough, the Samaritan. There's 10 lepers that come to Jesus. And from a distance, and they have to hold their hand up. They have to say, "Unclean, unclean." And Jesus heals them. And he says, "Go and show it to the priest." And they all left. But if you remember the story, the one guy came back. Remember that? The one man came back. And Jesus said, "Didn't I heal 10? And the only one that comes back is this Samaritan." They hated the Samaritans. They were half-breeds. Half-breeds. Part Israel and part Assyrian. And yet Jesus didn't heal 9, did he? Jesus didn't heal the 9 that were Jews, or however many were Jews. Jesus healed all of them. And it was this Samaritan who came back. Good grief. And Jesus said, "Don't ask me." I don't know, maybe God's telling us something. I don't know. Turn off your phone. And only this Samaritan came back, and it's Billy Graham who said true worship is the one who came back. The deaf and the dumb man in Mark 7, and we don't know if he was a Gentile or not, but we know the region of the world that he was from was a Gentile region. We know Jesus spoke to him in Aramaic. And there's a lot of people who think this deaf and dumb man that he was also a Gentile. But Jesus did all these things, and they didn't like this. They didn't like any of this. He's dealing with people that they hate, people they don't even want to be around, people they consider less than human. And yet Jesus is healing them. Jesus is spending time with them. And this is just we don't know all the things that Jesus did. But if that wasn't bad enough, he ate with tax collectors and sinners in Mark chapter 2, and they hated tax collectors. Tax collectors weren't even allowed to go into the temple. If you were a Jewish tax collector like Matthew, Jesus called Matthew out of the tax collector's booth, Matthew wouldn't have even been allowed to go into the temple because he was a tax collector. And yet in Mark chapter 2, Jesus is eating with them, spending time with them, and they're criticizing him. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? You know, the Samaritan woman at the well, John chapter 3, Jesus goes to not just a woman, but a Samaritan woman at the well. And Jesus talks to her about her life, and he spends time with her, and he spends time with her family. And, you know, it's not just about him recognizing her, it's about his interaction with her, his relationship with her. Even his apostles, those people closest to him, couldn't believe that he did it. Why are you with the Samaritan woman? Why would you do that? Why would you spend time with her? Jesus was transcending hate by his relationships that he had with other people. And even the people around Jesus couldn't understand why he did this. You know, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he, and he went up in a sycamore tree to see who he could see. We all sing that song in Vacation Bible School. But Zacchaeus was a tax collector, and he was hated. And Jesus was walking down the street, and Zacchaeus climbed up in a tree because he was of small stature, the Bible says, to see Jesus walking by. And Jesus was surrounded by all those people, all those Jews, all those righteous people, all those people who wanted Jesus to be this great king and leader that was going to stand up and wipe out all these injustices. And instead of that, Jesus looks up and he sees Zacchaeus in the tree, and he says, Zacchaeus, I'm going to go to your house today. You know, it wasn't about just Jesus seeing people, recognizing people, talking to people. It was the fact that Jesus saw those people as people, didn't he? When Jesus saw Zacchaeus, he didn't see a tax collector. He saw a man that could be changed for God. And when he went to eat with Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus said, half of what I have I'm going to give away, and I'm going to make it right with everybody that I made wrong. Zacchaeus, Jesus saw him. That woman at the well, Jesus didn't see a woman who had been divorced multiple times and was living with a man now and had all these things in her life and all this past in her life. Jesus saw a woman who needed to be healed. You see, the problem with us is we just see people for what they are. We just see them for the title or the tag we put in front of their name, for their nationality or their race or maybe what they've done with their lives. We don't see them for people. We dehumanize them. And when we do that on our mind and we make them less than human, it's all right for us to treat them like we want to treat them, to say about them what we want to say about them. We take away their dignity, and we take away their respect, and we take away their individuality and their uniqueness, and we take away what God sees within people. God never looked at anybody and took them in for what they are. God looks at you and takes you in for what you can be. And we have a hard time seeing that through our human eyes, and we lose our humanity. You know, this is one of the greatest parables of the Bible. And I'm not even going to tell you the parable. Well, I'm going to allude to it. I'm not going to read it to you. Y'all know it. Because the best part is not the parable. The best part is this lawyer. This lawyer is a story. This lawyer who wants to test Christ, right? And, you know, lawyers, my daughter's a lawyer, so I can talk about it. I mean, they have a way of doing that, right? The lawyer stood up and he says, Teacher, right, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And very few times has Jesus ever asked this question in the Bible. And Jesus answers the question with a question, as Jesus often does. He says, what's written in the law? How do you read it? Brent likes this part. This is one of Brent's favorite part of the Bible. How does it read to you? And he answered, he says, you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But the lawyer said, you see, you really got to look at the text. Wishing to justify himself, right? The lawyer said, who is my neighbor? You know, if Jesus would have said, oh, it's your fellow Jew, then the lawyer would have been like, I got this. I treat all them fellow Jews with the utmost respect, right? I mean, I can do that. But Jesus says, listen, I want to tell you a story. And y'all know the story. He said there was this man on this way to sell, and he got taken over by robbers and left on the side of the road for dead. And this priest come by, and he walked on the other side of the road and wouldn't help him. And the scribe come by and walked on the other side of the road and wouldn't help him. He said, but there was a Samaritan man. And this Samaritan man went to the man's aid, and he bandaged him up, and he laid him upon his donkey, and he took him down to the next town, and he put him up, and he said, I'll give you this money, and if I owe any more, I'll pay you when I come back through. Take care of this man and bind him up and heal him. And then he asked the lawyer a question. And he asked the lawyer, he said, who was this man's neighbor? And I think the response to the lawyer, to me, it just speaks volumes about humanity. The lawyer, he asked the lawyer, he said, who was this man's neighbor? And I always thought it was amazing the lawyer didn't say the Samaritan, right? He couldn't even bring himself to say that. He couldn't bring himself to say the Samaritan. And the lawyer says, the one who helped him. And Jesus says, do that. You see, it's easy. Isn't that what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount? He says, if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Right? Don't even the Gentiles, don't even the pagans, don't even the everybody, don't they all do that? But I tell you, love those who hate you, who use you, who are your enemies. Do good to those who do you wrong. And you'll be great in my kingdom. Jesus said, don't see people for what they are. See people for what they can be. And that's so hard, isn't it? I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I'm really not ready to give you this in my entirety. But I want to give you a thought. Jesus walked into a world of hate. Would you agree with that? You know, throughout history, if you want people to be united, give them a common enemy. Would you agree with that statement? You know, this nation was probably never more united in my lifetime than right after 9/11. Would you agree with that? Why? Because we had a common enemy. Osama bin Laden. We had a name. We had a face. We had somebody to hate. Right? You know, in World War II, when they wanted to raise money to fight Germany, they didn't put a German child's picture on a portrait. They put Adolf Hitler's picture on the wall and said, buy war bonds. Or Mussolini. Right? Because if we have a common enemy, we tend not to hate each other quite as much. It kind of comes back to that old saying, right? If we both had the same enemy, we're friends. I don't exactly remember how that saying goes, but it kind of goes like that. Jesus came to this earth, into this world of hate, this world of Romans and Greeks and Gentiles and Jews and everything else. And Jesus says, don't hate each other. Hate this guy. Your enemy is not the Romans, and your enemy is not the Jews, and your enemy is not the Gentiles, your enemy is not the Greeks. Your enemy is sin. Your enemy is Satan. Your enemy is this guy. Hate this guy. Don't hate each other. Hate him. And if we all hate sin enough, and we all hate him enough, we all hate sin enough, then we're going to get together because we have a common enemy. And it took me a long time to understand what Jesus was doing. Jesus could have walked into this earth and told the Jews to hate the Romans. They already did. That would have been an easy sell, right? But Jesus didn't do that. He says, don't hate each other. Hate sin. Hate evil. Hate what's bad. Hate the source of what divides us and what separates us and what makes us unhuman. Jesus said the enemy is the devil, the enemy, the harvest is the end of the age, the reapers are angels. Hate this guy. He's the one who causes discord. He's the one who causes trouble. Hate him. Because if we all hate that, then maybe we can all love each other. Now, of course, it didn't exactly work out that way, but in some ways it kind of did. In 1 Corinthians 15, listen to what he says. Then comes the end, when he hands over the kingdom to the God and Father, when he has abolished all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet, and the last enemy is death. Jesus never said that we're enemies of each other, that we're enemies of one another. Jesus said the enemy is evil, the enemy is sin, the enemy is death, and in the end I'm going to conquer that enemy. And if we all had the same enemy, we should all have the same goal, and that's heaven. And if we all have the same goal and we all have the same enemy, then we ought to be able to get along. Jesus put a face for evil, a name, something to hate. You and I, we need to look at humanity, the human race, through the eyes of Jesus. Jesus said, I came to seek and save that which was lost. He didn't say, I came to seek and save a certain group that was lost, although he said, I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But he said, I came to seek and save that which was lost. The lost sinner, the lost tax collector, the lost prostitute, the lost Gentile, the people nobody liked. Jesus said, they're who I came to save. When I started this sermon, I was going to spend all my time in the garden because I thought the garden is where Jesus faced his humanity. He could have went another way. He could have said that we're not worth it. He could have called legions of angels, as the scripture said, to prove that he was right. He could have walked away. He could have started a rebellion. He could have started a war right there in that garden. It's in Matthew. Peter strikes Malchus's ear. Could have been the start of a war. His guys are ready to fight. That's what that proves. Those guys are ready to fight. They're ready to start the war. They're ready to wipe out those enemies as the Jews. They're ready for Jesus to be the Jesus they wanted him to be. And Jesus says, put your sword back into its place. Because hate breeds hate. Do you believe that? Hate breeds hate. You can't out-hate somebody. I've tried. Don't work. You can't out-hate somebody. But you can out-love them. You know, Jesus had that figured out a long time before I ever lived. And Grant sings a song that always makes me get chills. Always. I've never sung that song I didn't get chills. Ancient words, long preserved, for our walk in this world. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Well, listen to what Jesus says. Jesus says, if you're going to stop hate, it has to start with us. right? Jesus says when somebody hates you, love them back. Jesus says when somebody does something wrong, do something right. Jesus says, don't see the world through your eyes, because your eyes are blind. They're blinded by the news. They're blinded by the media. They're blinded by things in your life. They're blinded by your perceptions. Jesus said, see the world through my eyes. And don't see people for who they are. See people for who they can be if they love me. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing?